Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming and committing to a Sunday afternoon. My name is Vanini Bellarmino. I'm the Assistant Director for Programs at the National Gallery. And I'm here with Andreas Schlegel and Hazel Lim-Schlegel. They're artists for the Children's Biennale. I just wanted to give a context of why we're here today and about the Children's Biennale. The Gallery Children's Biennale it happens every 2 years, where we work with established artists from Singapore and beyond to develop works for children and for their families. So if you have yet to see the show, it's on until the end of December. We commissioned 11 installations across the gallery, which is from the City Hall side all the way to the former Supreme Court. And one of the pairs that we work with for this year is Hazel and Andreas. Our theme was embrace. So we asked the artists to respond to the theme of embrace and think about what it means to them and unpack the understanding of embrace, at the same time embracing not only different practices, but bringing their practices together, but also to embrace the public who might encounter it. So unlike our exhibitions, this is still in support of the exhibitions, our core businesses exhibition, of course, but unlike the exhibitions where you normally come in as an audience, where you just view a work, for this particular works that we developed for the Children's Biennale, you can usually add to it, you could participate in them, and you can enter. So yeah, on that note, so Hazel and Andreas are both art educators. They teach full-time at LaSalle College of the Arts. They're both practicing artists as well. Hazel was trained as a painter, visual artist. She was a statistician. She studied statistics and eventually became an artist. She probably could share more about that later on. And then Andreas is a new media artist. They're not only artists, but they're also, not only that we asked them to come together for this work, they're also a real-life couple. They're also married. So this is also part of the idea of embrace that we were looking at. We approach artists who are also couples. A number of them were also couples. But for this year's Children's Biennale, I just want to ask them to kickstart the conversation by asking, so how did you come about? Their work is called the Oort Cloud and the Blue Mountain. So it's quite interesting to find out, I think, how they came up with this idea when the theme is embrace. So yes, Hazel and Ruth.
We started with the word embrace, and we sent in the first proposal, kind of expanding this idea of the embrace into various types of touch. And I think touch is very important as an element in a children program. So we sort of think about rubbing and touching and hugging or cuddle. So it expanded from there to become what it is. There's interactive elements, and there are elements that can move and things that light up and make sound. We didn't arrive at the title until a little bit later. I think you started with the Blue Mountain. We were both, looking at this Vasily Kandinsky's painting, which is the Blue Mountain, and Andreas really liked nature, and he thought, why don't we just incorporate the word Blue Mountain? So that's one half of the title. And then one day I was reading an article about space exploration and what I think that they discovered that's this icy belt of particles that's really at the outer reach of the universe, and it's called the Oort Cloud. So I thought that's really interesting because the Oort Cloud is really a place that we can never venture to. It is also very imaginative. We can't go there, we can't see it, we can only see it through NASA, I suppose. So I like that the idea of the Oort Cloud is really far, intangible, imaginative, imaginary, as opposed to the Blue Mountain, which is something that is tangible, that is in our immediate surrounding. So we thought that we'd just put the two titles together.
Yeah, I think for me the Blue Mountain was a nice reference because instead of just seeing the image, I think it's also important to kind of dive into the image and then imagine sounds that are happening within that place. Like you already mentioned, my background is in new media, so new media includes visual, sound, interaction, movement, a lot of things. So I think I would say because of that maybe I look at things from multiple perspectives. And the Blue Mountain to me kind of had a little bit of a sound element, like the leaves, or stepping onto the leaves, stepping onto branches, the cracking of branches while you're walking through a forest. And for me, these are always small little anchor points that I kind of build up on, where I think, how could I express this through my practice? My practice is very much technology-based. I work a lot with electronics. And there are certain elements, like for example motors, solenoids, that allow me to express these ideas that I see or that I hear within a medium in my practice and through these electronic components. So when you look at the work, there are quite a couple of electronic components that make sounds, that introduce movement. I think for me, a lot of it started with just imagining these sounds from that reference, the Blue Mountain, but also the Oort Cloud. So these icy little blocks that are somewhere in space, which, like you said, we will probably never reach. I think are reflected within, and I don't know if you have seen the work, are reflected within that cylinder that is moving and rotating, and it's filled with all these little leftovers of laser cut, of laser cutting, which to me are kind of an imaginative expression or representation of these ice blocks, of these ice fragments within the Oort Cloud. So I think by composing the work, a lot of these references are made based on the Oort Cloud and based on the Blue Mountain that we chose as a starting point, but also as a title for our work.
So, have you seen the artwork, by the way? I just wanted to know this. And has anyone been downstairs? Yeah. Anyway, I'm curious to know how you actually. So first, you came up with the title, came up with the concept, but how did you bring your independent practices together? Because painting and then like new media, how did this come together? How did you manage this space of coming together?
I think there's a lot of ping-ponging. At first it was quite difficult because my work, I'm a visual artist, so he always say that my work is very static, always very still.
Not really, but okay.
So for me, I do struggle a little bit with the parts that are moving, or I can't really tell how he would be able to move or light up or create sounds from it. But you could just kind of learn along the way. I think for me, I started with the crafting aspects. So, I mean, we spent a lot of time with our daughter in the studio, so I also need to occupy her. So we really did a lot of crafting elements. So I think for me, we started with the pom-poms. So we made lots of it, and then we start to, here's the pom-pom, and we start to create a lot, and then sort of make it into an object, and I passed it to him, and I say, what can you do with it? So, and then he started thinking about whether he can install lights, or could it be made to move? So I think it sort of started from there, this sort of conversation between what was being made by me first, and then he could adapt a kind of electronics component to it, or sometimes he has an idea of how to do something or move something, and then I have to adapt to create a kind of visual out of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the elements that you see within the work are products of working within the studio. I also have to mention that we worked with three more, sometimes 4 more people. One of them is Dia Mohamed, who was really not just a great help, but also a collaborator in the work, making things. And Fazli Manzoor, he helped us out with some of the engineering elements of the work. I think what you don't see in the work downstairs is that there's a lot of hidden wires and electronics that cost us a lot of time. There were night shifts of installation, of making the work. So all the work is built from scratch. And I think in this particular domain of making art, that's sometimes an element that is underestimated or people don't really realize and even know about. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, a problem. So this is something you usually don't have when you're dealing with, and maybe that's a reference to the static. When you're working with static art making, which is a painting or a sculpture, that in this particular work or area of work, you have components that can fail. And when they fail, and we often get calls, oh, this is not working anymore, this is not working anymore. So it's kind of navigating on a slippery slope, navigating on ice, where sometimes you just fall and then you just have to repair it. And I think that also has become really part of the work, that you have to make things work and that you have to invest a lot of time and that you also have to experiment. So for a lot of the components that you see in here, there's not really a recipe. So we have to come up with that recipe. We have to try it out. We have to first make it, which is time consuming. And then in the end, we decide, hey, let's put this on the wall. Some of the works use off-the-shelf components. Some of the works use a drone that has been dismantled, and we are using the propellers to animate or to actuate that colorful wig that is hanging there on the left side of the work, the shaggy wig. And I think these are all experiments that come out of the studio, that come out of collaborating with others, that come out of testing certain situations, that come out of taking what Hazel has been crafted and then animating it through the means or the elements that I use. I'm not sure if I'm drifting away now, but yeah. I think that's just maybe a little bit of to give you maybe a little bit of an understanding how we work within the studio.
What was interesting was what you highlighted, like this idea of failure. Because like, what is your idea of failure and win maybe in art making in this particular work? Because we challenge them to work together and do something that they have not done together before. Of course, you have collaborated in other projects, but this is a project that's quite big, that would have be in contact with a big number of like a number of children who you cannot control, because normally if you're looking at a painting again, like, or a static work, then you don't have to touch it or you don't have to hold it. And in this case, what was your idea of win or also failure? What would have failed or what would work?
Should I? Maybe I just continue. I think for us, the first really test bed of the work was when we first installed it in the gallery. So in the studio, we didn't really have a chance to fully test the whole work. First of all, it's too big. We had one component installed in the work so that we know how to hang things, how to hide things behind inside of that fake wall. But when we first installed it and had it running and invited kids to play with the work, I got a little bit nervous because, of course, there are situations that we haven't considered. People climbing onto the work, people really stress testing the work by hitting or kicking certain elements. If something didn't work, or if the action didn't respond in an effect in a kid, you could see that the kid would become a little bit impatient, and we had one boy who really started kicking that button and what's wrong here, why is it not working? So I think these are all moments that of course, are scary. At least for me, oh man, now hopefully it's not going to break. Things broke. But they're also revealing because this is where you finally understand if your ideas have been translated properly into an interface for kids, or if it still needs adjustments and refinement.
I think there's two parts. There's the installation part. For me, is the working in the studio, because both Hannah and I, we were doing a lot of small crafty things, which ended up not being used because it is very hard for for me to kind of understand whether this could last. Because to be practical, this is a 7-month exhibition, so it's not like an exhibition that is going to be for a few weeks or a month, which is quite normal for a lot of artists. That you really need to create something that is not just durable, but will withhold the attention and interest of the audience. So I think that for me is a challenge, because a lot of things that's being done are rather fragile, although they're very interesting for me and aesthetically pleasing, but it may not withstand the stress of some of these, kids who we don't really know. So I think moving into the gallery is really quite eye-opener, because it's huge. And then we have the preview, and we have all these kids coming in, and we start to observe what they actually do with different elements, which is also why we wanted the floor design to really play an important part to guide the viewer to different points, so that they know that they could linger at different places a little bit longer than the rest.
In relation to the floor piece was created by Hannah. Hannah is the 7-year-old daughter of Hazel and Andreas. I just wonder how you kind of negotiated the space, being like, you're looking after your daughter working in an artwork, and then incorporating that into your piece. Yeah, how were you informed by Hannah's behavior as well, and like the things that she drew? Because I remember you mentioned a number of times that the vocabulary that turned out also in your aesthetics was informed by the language that she's using, like unicorn or like a rainbow, which is quite evident in the work.
Well, first of all, the floor piece is made from patchwork or collage of a few of her drawings. She paints a lot at home, and we just let her spend time on her own and just dabble with the paint. So we kept all her drawings, and so we decided to do a kind of collage with the existing paintings that she have and create these sort of islands. We redesigned it, but we want to create these islands where audience are encouraged to spend time at several locations, so that they can trigger the senses. At the same time, I think Andreas is very inspired by her language, because she, little girls, they like to watch Little Pony and all that. So all these unicorn, the pink, the rainbow become an aesthetics that we want to incorporate through the lights.
Yeah, so some light effects are inspired by a unicorn or a rainbow. So some of the lines, they start sparkling like a rainbow, or they're animated like a rainbow. They are, I think when they start to sparkle, that's a reference to the unicorn, or my interpretation of a unicorn language. And I think to come back to the floor sticker, yes, so her paintings were kind of a starting point for the floor sticker, but then I also have to say that we worked with a designer on that. So giving a work to someone else and then allowing this other person to develop the work further, I think in this work as well, but also other works that I'm doing, is an important component. So your work is not just your own thing, but it's like you said earlier, it's a ping pong effect, where you give a little bit of work someone else interprets it or rearranges it and then gives it back to you. You have a discussion and you fine-tune and complete the work so that at the end it appears on the floor of, as a floor piece for our installation work.
How would you say, so for the Children's Biennale, we usually work in a public circulation space where normally there isn't a place for art. And I just wonder, like, how did you also address this concern that your work is situated in this just passageway where there's a restaurant, and then normally there's nothing there, apart from responding to the theme of embrace, bringing your practices together, and then incorporating Hana, and now responding also to the space. How did you negotiate with that space? Yeah. How did it influence the design or the composition of the work?
I think very early we understood that we couldn't put anything into the space because it's a transitional space, so we had to work with the walls. So there's the long wall, and then there's the small little wall between the two doors. We started off with only considering the long wall. However, we felt then the work would be very flat or too one-dimensional. So we really wanted to use that small little element between the two entrances to kind of add a spatial dimension to it. And then the floor sticker should kind of link both walls together so that it becomes this three-dimensional space that you can enter. It is very distinct, or it's very different from the otherwise very monotonous hallway. So we hope that you enter another space by stepping onto the floor sticker and then kind of being within that Oort Cloud and the Blue Mountain. So I think that's how we interpret it, or that's how we wanted to work with this transitional space. Even though, not even though. Another thing, and before I forget, another thing that I find very interesting in observing people interacting with the work is that for me, it works really well for kids between 3 and 6 and 7. I observed that kids that are older, like 8, 9, or 12, are a little bit rougher and are a little bit more demanding in what to expect from the work, whereas kids that are 3 or younger, 3 to 6, they really want to find out what this simple element like this button kind of does. So they lie on it or they push it, and then at some point the lights, and they're supposed to do that, they move from one side to the other. And after they realize that, so they kind of start to play. So they push more. We see kids that then run from one end to the other because they have understood if I press the button, right, the light moves from one side to the other. Same goes for the other 2 buttons that you touch, and then you either hear sounds, the solenoids, which are a reference to maybe woodpeckers, and the other button actuates the shaggy wig, where you see these ribbons kind of flow into the air. So I think kids between 3 and 6, at least I think, have this sense of wonder and, what is this? How does this work? And there's really an element of exploration then that is happening. Whereas I think older kids, but also parents, show a different behavior in that sense.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talk about with our curators and the organizers is at some point, do we want to put instructions? Do we want to say press here and then look there, stand here and observe that? But I think it becomes maybe too science center, perhaps, that or prescriptive. It's a little bit too prescriptive that, if you do this, you realize that. Because I think kids actually do observe, and they really can find out for themselves this sort of abstract relationship between what is happening at the lower level and what is happening on top on the walls, and they start to make connections. So we really like that kids at that age really have this sense of wonder that allows them to make connections. They may not necessarily be always correct, that they think that they're pressing this button and that is moving. It may not be so, but we like that they spend time to observe and they spend time to sort of connect what is happening around there. And I think the space is interesting because it is probably a space that people don't spend a lot of time. It's kind of walking past. So we made that sidekick wall to sort of wink when people pass by the doorways and just say hello through the lights. But I think really the sound, the lights, and the movement, we want them to sort of say hello, you know, or just give you a little wink when you pass by this space.
If you had another opportunity to develop this based on the learnings that we've taken from this experience of also working together, because it's multi-layered, there's a lot of negotiations, not only with the space, but with you as both artists, you know, practicing artists. What would you take from it, and what would be the next step for you to develop this work further?
For me, I think it depends on the audience, because when we make this or we design this work, we really have in mind the younger children, and that's why the height is of a certain, you know, they are all quite low, and we really do hope the adults would go down to the level of the kids to experience it. If not, then they would start to wonder, what should I do with this? But we really want them to come down to the position of the child and to look up at what is on top. So I mean, it really depends on the audience, but there definitely are a lot of elements that we have done, even things that we didn't show. They are still in the studio, which I thought they are really interesting and they can be further developed. I think there are certain elements on its own, for example, the lights that could be explored a little bit, or even the crafting parts that with the lights as well, that perhaps we could go further in the future.
Yeah, for me, I think it was interesting to see which elements work and which don't work. Surprisingly, the buttons work quite well, even though sometimes they would be treated quite aggressively. But I think the bottom layer worked quite well. Some of the sensors, the proximity sensors, I think for me it's something that didn't work so well because I think it's too abstract, or I think it's too distant for an audience to understand. So for me, there would be a little bit more work that needs to go into finding the right language in order to make this better understood by an audience. I think I don't have a specific. I'm looking at the picture, sorry. I don't really know what exactly to add or improve at this point. For me at the moment, it's just interesting to see, and I have done that already before, we have done that before, to observe how people respond to it and then reflect on that to then maybe improve or change certain things.
But it's really, if you have not seen it, we could actually take you there, but it's quite fascinating how intuitive the children are, because we were trying to predict certain behaviors of people that actually it was not right. Like, we kind of underestimated them or overestimated. We anticipated a lot of like blocks, which didn't really happen, which is quite impressive. But the smaller kids, they really know exactly what to do. And then I guess it depends on the perspective from if you are shorter and then if you are taller, as you said, moving down. But would anyone have questions? So we devised this talk, this artist chitter chatter, because we really wanted to bring our artists closer to our audiences so that they are not like this, you know, mystical beings, that you are part of the process. The same way that we offer art to our public, we wanted to be in conversation with them. So if you guys have questions, yeah, does anyone, please? Yeah.
Thanks.
So when you first saw the brief and you knew you were going to create this piece and you knew the location, right? So obviously you had some ideas and plans. So from your ideas and plan to what's right now at number 7, how different or how similar are they?
We started working with a designer who works in-house with the gallery, Yan, and his team. He's an architect. So I think we sat down for quite a number of sessions to brainstorm based on also their experience working for different festivals. What would they also recommend to be the right wall, the right height, what kind of wall, what kind of slope, for example. So they do a lot of advising on those aspects. So I think in terms of the structure itself, it is quite pretty much the same as how it was being designed, and we are quite pleased with it. Of course, there are some issues with the holes. We wanted a pegboard so that there's some flexibility for us to hang things at different location. So I think that in that sense, that was pretty much similar from the beginning to the conception, from the conception to the actual realization. I think for the work itself, well, we talk about how do we put different elements and what is also manageable for us so that it doesn't look very cluttered and it doesn't seem like it's too busy for the kids to sort of try to connect and make sense of the installation. Yeah, so I think there's a bit of adapting to things and whether we should add on or not. We call them modules, so we know that we have how many? 7 modules? 11. We have 11, I think 11 modules. And whether the modules should be placed at different, also we need to look at the composition of the whole installation so that it's also visually interesting.
I think for this proposal, what was interesting is that actually, this is an anecdote, but like we were in discussion already with Hazel and Andreas for the first edition of the Children's Biennale. And then this concept was sitting there somewhere, and it didn't really work at that time. And when they came back with the proposal 2 years later, it was quite clear, and I kept asking actually the same question, like, how did you know that this is exactly what you want? Because I think the first drawing reflects what's actually downstairs, except maybe for those, the invisible elements probably would be the variables, like the wiring and the interactivity. But it sort of matured. I think
we kept quite close to the drawing that we planned because I think that gives us a guide to what needs to be completed and I think for the electronics part, it really needs to be very clear how they can connect this with programming and all that, so that I think we have 11 elements or 11 modules, so every time we can cross out something, we are very happy, like we are done with this part, and then we can move on to the other.
After working with like National Gallery and doing this, do you think your own, because I know artists sometimes very serious and the research is very focused, but after this, do you think your own way you think and work got a bit of shift or not? Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I definitely learned a lot because Andreas do a lot of things that are, with the computer programming, which is a bit mystical to me still. But I think, like I said just now, there's a lot of communication that you need to learn how to communicate. Like, what can I do on my part here that could become an element that could move or light up or create sound, for example. So that I really learned a lot because there are a lot of things that we've tested that absolutely couldn't work because either it's too fragile or it doesn't hang onto the or on the mechanism properly, and it couldn't create the sound that we want. So you really need to adapt quite a lot. There's a bit of engineering skills, I suppose, that you learn along the way, and mechanical skills.
I think for me the most interesting part is, or was or still is, the interactive element, the interactive part. So when the work is set up, you invite your audience, and then it kind of takes on its own dynamics. That's where I learn for the future what I should do again and what I should not do again, or where I need to improve. And I think this kind of work, this is really an important element. And you're always a little bit in the dark when you develop the work, because and I have said that before, you don't really know what to expect. And you really have to consider a lot of different situations. You have to make sure it's rigid and strong enough to withstand. And we are dealing with kids, and kids are certain times aggressive. And that's not, I'm not meaning this in a negative sense, but this is just what is happening. And I think for an artist that is really challenging. So if you take a sculptor and allow a sculptor to kind of have its work treated the same way our work has been treated sometimes, I think there would be some headaches and some heart attacks. So we definitely have to take this part into consideration right from the beginning in order to prevent chaos and maintenance. So for me, that's a very important part of that learning process. In terms of working together, I have realized that a long time ago, but again, I think it is really important to work with other people. I also understand that there's always, there can be conflicts between different parties during the process, which have to be resolved and which have to be dealt with. And in this kind of work, another thing that I have learned, but I have no answer to it, is that it is very time consuming. So we spend a lot of nights in the gallery just to set up. And that one, I still have to kind of figure out how to find better solutions to set up these kind of works. It's kind of traumatic, yeah. Not really, but it takes a lot of time. The work that you don't see is all behind these doors. There's a lot of wires, there's a lot of electronics, like I said in the beginning. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, big drama.
But I think, I mean, as we were setting up, because the rest of the artists were also setting up, and we were looking at how they were setting up, a lot of them do have the contractors help them in the installation. So at some point we were like, we should have asked the contractor to make it, right? Why didn't we design something and make that? But I think on hindsight, I think we really enjoy the crafting of whether the front end or the back end, which is mostly Andreas and some of our assistants' job, is that it's really hands-on, and we really thoroughly know how to troubleshoot and how to make it work and how to repair and how to maintain them all by ourselves. So I think in a way that makes us really intimate with the work, all the elements in itself, because it's really not, except for the wall, which is made by the contractors, the rest of the elements are really handmade by us. So there's a very intimate, close relationship with those objects that I appreciate, and I know how exactly they could be managed or they could be repaired.
I have to say, like most of the works, because there are 11 works, while you were setting up, it might seem that they were not around, but there's a lot of back end that's not seen in the work, because for this edition, more than, I would say 80% or 90% were done by the artists at their studio. So the respective artists use different things, and you don't see the people whipping them behind the scene. I won't say who. No, but like really, we have to really work closely with the artists. And I think the artists that we select and work with, I mean, you will never know, but there's always a lot of negotiation part with the programs team. We have a team, we have a pool of, we have a team of educators as well. We have a designer. There's also a lot of negotiation that taking place within the building, within the space, and external stakeholders, etc., because of considerations of safety and security. So I think, at least for the Children's Biennale in general, if you're an artist for the Children's Biennale, this would not be your conventional exhibition where you could do your work independently. You would have to be able to collaborate with a full team of more than maybe 20 people, including the people who are, because there are a lot of comments that come in and out. So people who are watching the work, the people that you see are mediator between the audience and the artwork, because they have the first-hand experience of dealing with a public of, say, if you have 10 kids coming to see their work, how would they probably, react or respond to it? While we cannot predict it, we have to anticipate certain things. Or can you actually drill on the wall? How do you secure this? I mean, just the not so sexy things that the artists have to live with to come up with such work.
But I really must thank the National Gallery's team for always supporting us, and I really like the negotiation process. Of course, they always come from a good place they have a lot of experience with Children Biennale and Children Festival, that they sort of predict, oh no, this is going to happen, they're going to step on this, or they're going to pull that. So all this really become part of our decision-making process in how should we design or install the work in such a way that that will be lasting, that would be durable.
You negotiate with each other, you negotiate with your daughter, you negotiate with the space and an entire team, and then eventually when it comes out there, we negotiate with our audience. And thus, the theme of embrace really, it comes really in a full cycle, because after that you are a part of the work. It's not done just for the sake of putting it out there, but it's really done with a specific audience in mind, and I think that was make it special. Does anyone have more questions?
Thank you for the sort of inside view of how, the working of these electronics. There is a question I want to ask, is that all those LED lights in colors, rainbow colors, are they available, or have you to program a certain LED light that go across? They are in the rainbow colors. Each of them are different, right? So are they available sort of a color, or you have to program it in a certain sort of digital numbers?
So that's all programmed.
That's programmed.
Yeah.
The whole stretch of LED light.
Everything.
Everything.
So I think the whole work is really DIY.
Okay.
We go to the shop, we buy the components, if it's LED lights or if it's motors, but they're all programmed from scratch.
Okay.
So none of them are kind of off-the-shelf animated objects. It is really putting everything together on our own, and I think this is where all the time and work goes into. But I mean, they're available for me if you want.
The other thing is that, no, I was just wonder, because if this would have to program it in a colors, then you got to really very careful about, when it runs back and forth, that with the sensors, it takes a lot of. So if this has some problems, so for example, like the connectors, one of them is just loosened out.
Yeah.
I got to, during the course of maybe 2-3 months exhibition, you got to fix it. You got to find a place to locate the place, and then you could fix it.
You have to take that into consideration from the beginning. I think if you open these doors and look at how the wires are, the infrastructure of the wires.
Sure.
So I think it is, at least to us who have built it, clear which wire goes from one point to the other in order to identify malfunctioning. So, like I said in the beginning, it is really important to be aware and to know where failure can happen in order to be able to repair it. We had a few calls from NGS saying, oh, this doesn't work and this doesn't work. So luckily we have a really great team, Dia and his crew, who come down and look at the made functioning and are really able to repair that in a short period of time. And if you look at this image, so that's how it looks like. So this is all from scratch.
Yeah.
So we're basically building a spaceship here, right? So it really has to function. And we really, it's not a black box. So we are able to look into the system to identify which part is working and which is not.
The other thing is that, can you enlighten us, when tear down, will you be able to sort them out properly so that you can, supposing you will have to repeat at another place. So how do you, when you dismantle them, how do you classify and how do you, for example, the mechanical, cutting, the motor, the sensoring, do you have a plan where you can category, put them in places, boxes? And
we actually have boxes, so labeled with work A, work B, work C. We have a plan, not drawn in AutoCAD, but we could do that. It is really important to know, and I think we have a good understanding, and I have to check with Dia again, but we have a good understanding what components have been used for each of these modules on that wall. So if one fails, we would know how to replace it and where to get that replacement. But reinstalling it, right, is not a thing of 1 day or 2 days, so it really takes a little bit of time. Do I want to find a way of optimizing that? Probably. Will it be an off-the-shelf solution? Probably not. So I think we really enjoy the DIY approach in it. It's a lot of sweat, but it's also a lot of accomplishment in the end.
Thank you. I'm more appreciative of whatever you show in here. I'm just
Thank you.
thinking that, that so complicated, it's like a neural, sort of a neural, our neural network in the mind. Or how do you gather then when you want to repeat the exhibition in some way,
It is quite a, just to finish the thought, it is quite a complex, even though the work as it is might not look as very complex or complicated because they're on, complex is something else than just 11 elements to us, I think. But if you consider all the infrastructure and the system that is running the whole work behind it, I would consider it is rather complex, really down to the code and animating everything, and not just considering what will happen, but also considering what should not happen. And just one nice element, one nice observation that I think we did during one of the setup sessions is a group of contractors came in and we were just fiddling around with all our electronics. So it seemed like they were actually quite impressed what we are doing. Artists working as an engineer, so that's also a concept that is not very well known and understood, and maybe sometimes also not very well appreciated. But I think I have to pat myself on the shoulder and ask, so we do a good job, right? So as an artist, you can be an engineer, you can be someone working with technology to an extent that it survives 6 months, and hopefully it will survive a 6 or 7 month exhibition at the National Gallery with a couple of 100,000 visitors. Sorry.
Does anyone have more questions? We have space for one more.
Hi. I think, in relation to what you just said, because obviously the work is challenging the notion of art itself. If you think about art as, the image, how we perceive basically when we go to museums, what is it that we see? We see images, we see three-dimensional images, but images. And this one is basically, the idea of being intuitive, the idea of playfulness, the idea of interactivity. So, and obviously, we relate those concepts to kids. How do you think you can sort of like translate these ideas, these concepts that you're working with, to a different audience, to adults. And do you think the museum would be willing to work with you if you did that? What do you think?
That's a question for you.
So the Children's Biennale goes beyond, you know, kids age 6 to 12, because, you know, naturally a kid would not come to the gallery by themselves. So it actually embraces a whole full spectrum of audiences, and we do take this into account, that the works are not necessarily kiddish. It's accessible for children, but it's also accessible for adults. So this is something that's already at the beginning of like the ideation when we're curating the show, when we select the artist, and we discuss with them the space. This is also in consideration of the adult visitors. So they're never separate.
But I think using the same work within an adult setting, I think it probably needs adjustments. We heard before the interactive elements, even though we want adults to go down and look up and when you actuate or when you press these buttons, it might not really work within an adult setting. Will the work as it is in terms of concept work for an adult audience? I'm not sure, so you have to tell me if that would work for you or what you would like to see. But what I said earlier is that kids, or observing kids that are older, like 12 and above, the expectation is very different. So I think they have a better understanding of technology, and then there's a different expectation of technology, right? It has to be more sophisticated. Even though I think a button, you know, has sophisticated characteristics already, or attributes, you just have to release them and explore them. But I think older or also adults or young adults, they might expect a more sophisticated technological environment in order to appreciate it maybe, but that's something to be tested. I don't think that high tech necessarily makes the work better, but can. But that's just one observation that I had in terms of the difference between 3 to 6 year olds, which I thought worked best as an audience for our work so far, and kids and young adults above.
I think the adults that we observe, who either on their own or with their children, they tend to be a little bit more hesitant with touching, because I think their experience with the museum or being in a gallery is much different from children who are more tactile and more intuitive. So they tend not to want to touch, or they tend to be a little bit more distant. So I think a different type of sensory experience needs to be developed if it is targeted for audience as opposed to someone younger who are very different you know, users of technology. So I think that really needs to be considered.
We hope that there's always this kid in everyone, and I think, yeah, for Children's Biennale, that's what we're really addressing, but just through the eyes of the artists. How can you be a kid again? We also have another show. It has a sister show in Germany, in Dresden, which is called the Kindle Biennale. And one of our artists for the previous edition, we had 3 artists from the Children's Biennale that went to Dresden. One of them is here, Lin Lu, where we translated the work from performance, which was an adult piece for children, but actually as an installation, it also worked for adults. And in Dresden, I wanted to highlight Dresden because Dresden's goal is to present contemporary art. So they use Children's Biennale as an avenue to present contemporary art for a very conservative audience. So they have a more mature audience, but at the same time, they're still targeting kids, but they're also targeting adults. So it's more playing on the universality of art and really this child in every one of us, that we can still be young again and be playful and just start to discover things again. But on that note, yeah, we have the show until the 29th of December. Hazel and Andreas will be back in October to give a workshop. We have slots for 12 people. Yeah, 12 people. If you want to tinker, learn how to do this program, sir, you're welcome. You can register. Yeah, so please catch the show. It's until 29th of December. It's free for Singaporeans and permanent residents. Yeah, it's across the gallery. It's a good way to experience a space. And yeah, I think we're proud to say that this is quite a unique project that you can be part of art and be a kid again. Thank you very much for coming to Artist Chitter Chatter.